I think this is going to be the last video recording on document and record management. I think there's enough information available now in the Google Classroom that you can have quite an idea what you need to do. The essence of it is that an organization requires, if you want to manage your business properly, a good document and records management system. I've given you an idea how you need to structure it. We've given you a copy of a document control procedure. We've given you some information on naming conventions. So what else can we discuss? Well, earlier I said that we need to discuss about how do we keep our documents. Do I keep it in hard copy or do I keep it in electronic format? Let's have a look at some of the requirements first. A document record management system needs to be able to do the following things. There must be a document procedure that says how we approve documents. In other words, who creates documents that goes into the system, who approves documents, who says they are officially documents for this company. This can be external documents, in other words, documents that comes from the outside, requirements from clients, letters from the taxman, invoices, all kinds of external communication, notifications of certain things. Or it can be internal documents, all your procedures, your policies, your internal documents like your banking statements, your invoices, your orders, your risk assessments, your procedures, your checklists, your forms, your photographs, everything. The procedure must address the fact that you will review your documentation, that it will be updated from time to time, sometimes just because time has passed by and we've learned more things, or the company has changed the way that we do business. Sometimes it's as a result of a changed requirement from a client, or it's because we've had an incident and we've realized that we didn't have good controls in place. So they will be updating and reviewing of your documentation and reapproval of the documentation. You need to be able to identify the changes in this document. So when was it last changed and when was the last revision? And there's normally a version control so that we can see this was version 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, and so on. We must be able to have the relevant documents that people need in the field to be able to perform consistently and safely and produce quality stuff. All of that documentation must be available to the people that need to use them. No use locking up a file with all your documentation somewhere in the supervisor's office, and then people need the documentation to look up certain things like your emergency procedures, your first aid procedures, or MSDSs, or operating procedures, or whatever the case might be, and then it's locked up in the supervisor's office. So relevant documentation must be available at the point where people need to use it. And actually, that was one of the reasons for the safety file. The safety file is to have certain documentation available at the point of use where it's relevant. The documents must be legible, you must be able to read them, and you must be able to readily, quickly identify what it is, what's the date, and so on. So checklists and inspections and attendance registers and whatever document you're going to use must be clearly marked, must be clearly it must clearly indicate what is the document and what version is it, what date was it, and whether it was approved or not. Like I said, you need to identify external documentation and control their distribution. You don't want notifications and letters and whatever to float around the company about your bank accounts and tax statements and all kind of things, or notices or fines or orders and all kind of things. So external documentation also needs to be controlled, and their distribution needs to be managed. You also want to take old and obsolete documents. You want to take them out. It debulks your system. It makes sure that your system stays clean, but it also makes sure that people don't refer to old stuff that's been replaced with newer requirements, newer information. And if you are going to keep obsolete documents, sometimes it's nice, we want to keep the old documents, we just want to put them in the archive, then I must clearly mark them as archived. So those are very basic, or those are the ultimate requirements that we need to achieve when we set up document and record management systems. All of the information that I've given you so far helps you to achieve this information: the document control procedure, the naming conventions, the document hierarchy, and so on. I've given you a document control procedure. It's an example. It suited that organization for which this document control procedure was written. Have a look at what's in there, and don't sheepishly just follow what's in there. Ask yourself, can this work for my organization, or is there something that I need to do differently? Do I understand what goes in here? And if I don't understand, don't just take that document, or if it's not going to work for you, don't take that document and implement them. You need to build something that works for your organization. Even ISO 9001 does not prescribe to you how to do things. They just specify to you that for your organization and for your needs, you need to put something together that conforms to the requirements that I've given you in the previous slide, but that works for your organization, so that you can operate effectively and produce safely, environmentally friendly, and quality products for your customers. Documents and records includes all kinds of information: videos, photographs, recordings, documents, forms, checklists, letters, whatever the case might be. Nowadays, what we have, it's not like in the olden days, 20 years back, when all documentation was basically documents. Nowadays, even this thing that I'm recording for you becomes a record. It becomes a document that you can refer to sometime later in your life. We take photographs nowadays with our cell phones during inspections, and those things become records. And we need to organize those things, because we can take hundreds of photographs in a day, and if they are not in context, then we won't know where were they taken, why were they taken, and what are they trying to show. Right, so photographs, videos, and all of those things also form part of your documents and records. You've got to make it work for your organization. Now, there are two main forms in which we can keep our documents. The first one is the old classic hard copy, a paper and a file. You guys have seen in your safety files how quickly that can become very bulky. And that's only a fraction of the information. That information that's currently in the safety file only pertains to the stuff that the client wants to see from your system. But there's a lot of things that are still happening in the background that the client never gets to see. All your invoices, all your tax returns, all your registration documents, all your procedures, your employee records, your timesheets, all of those things sit somewhere in the background. There are lots of inspections and reports and all kind of things that we keep on a continuous basis when we run a business. So when I'm talking about a document and record control system, I'm not just talking about a safety file. I'm talking about organizing all the documents and records in your business for your own benefit. A hard copy is easy and natural to work with. It's intuitive because we've worked with it all our lives. So it's easy to have a hard copy, and I can scribble on it, and I can write on it, and I can sign on it, and I can file it somewhere. It's quick to look up. If your stuff is organized nicely, it's quite easy to look up, especially if you're not electronically all that literate or well organized. Then sometimes it takes a while to get to your electronic documentation. And you're not dependent on the internet or electronics or ESCOM. If the power is down, you can still see your hard copies. However, I come from a time where all we had were hard copy documents. This was still in the early days before we had even Microsoft Windows 2. And the only way that we could distribute all these documents in an organization was we had copies of files of all the procedures and the checklists and the forms. And we used to work on a site where there was 5,000 people, and there used to be like 100, 150 points of distribution for these files. And it becomes a nightmare if you just want to update one file. So if you needed to update one file, you had to collect 150 files, or you had to distribute the documents to the various owners of the files, and then they never update them. So people centralized it. They brought the files back, and before the files were even back with their owners, there was another modification. So they are very hard to keep updated, especially if your changes are happening on a quick basis. And it could easily happen that somebody sits with a copy of a hard copy file somewhere, and it's not updated. And you also need to think very nicely about your health and safety files. This requirement that there be 2 health and safety files and one of these sits somewhere in the office doesn't work. The intent of the safety file was always that you would have the documents on site with you, so that if somebody comes around and they say, can you show me your risk assessment for this job, then we can see the risk assessment and look that your controls are working well. Okay, so the idea was that the safety file would be the relevant documentation at the place of work, so that we can keep it up to date. And you can't tell me I sent the vehicle checklist that I did half an hour ago, it's lying in the office. Okay, safety file was made to be a live document. Now I have a safety file and I keep it somewhere, and it's not updated on a regular basis. And there's a lot of irrelevant documentation in there that the client wants to see, but that doesn't need to be on my site on a regular basis. So that's the disadvantage of hard copy files. They become bulky and they are not always live working documents. So it makes sense to take some of my documents, like my audits, my inspections, my checklists, procedures and whatever that I need on site, and maybe split them from my documentation like employee contracts, company registration, all that kind of stuff, which are not documents that will change on a regular basis. Okay? But that's hard copies, the advantages and the disadvantages. Also, another problem with a hard copy file is that if it gets damaged by water or fire or something like that, and it's the only copy that you have, you're stuffed, because your history has been destroyed. And we said that the documents must be protected against damage and harm. Okay, so that is hard copies. I'm not a great fan of hard copies, but I understand, and I am sometimes much more comfortable with just grabbing a pen and a book or whatever and writing something than I am with having to have a computer or a tablet or a phone and then typing in there. There are ways to get around that by creating forms and templates, but hard copies are sometimes easier. Question is, what do I do with the hard copies to make sure they go into my filing system, then they're updated and they are not damaged or lost? Let's look at electronic document storage systems. Now this is where we get to computer hard drives, memory sticks, external hard drives, cloud storage like Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive, and those things. Advantages of those things are that as long as you are synchronized or connected to the internet, you will have access to that documentation, and you can see that documentation anywhere, which also then brings the disadvantage. If I only have it available in the cloud and I'm not connected to the internet, then I can't see my documentation. There are ways to get around that. What we do is you create what we call synchronized copies of that document on your laptop. And if anybody changes that thing in the cloud, the change gets synchronized to your laptop or your phone or wherever you are keeping it. Whenever you make a change on your laptop, that change then gets fed back into the central storage. So it's very flexible in that way, but it also carries the risk of, if you don't carry synchronized copies, that you might not have access to the documents when you're not connected. Electronic systems are easily updated. So it's easy to change a document and then publish it as the latest version and send an email or a WhatsApp notification that it's updated, and that original document stays there, and everybody then has access to the latest document. We use that as a single point of reference, and we say that any hard copies that you print is basically the redundant the moment that you print it. You can use it for a day or two, but the electronic copy is also always your reference base. So it's easy to update these things, these electronic documents and records, even over thousands of people. It's easily distributed, and you can have quick feedback. If you make your forms electronic, the moment that people complete these forms in the field, wherever you are, you can see the updated data if you set it up correctly. It's also easy to back up, to make multiple copies of your documents and your records on different hard drives, different means, store it in different cloud services. So much more easier than it is to do it with hard copies. And every time that you need to make another backup of the hard copy, you need to make basically photocopies or whatever of all your hard copy documents. What are the disadvantages to electronic storage systems? Well, you need connectivity, you need electricity, of course. It's vulnerable to equipment and software failure, or especially if you don't back it up. That's why we have backup systems in place. It's easy to collect too much information. It's so easy to take 1,000 pictures on a day, and you don't catalog them properly, and they sit there somewhere in your data storage, but they add no value. The same with documents, checklists, and you collect stuff from all over the internet, and you store it in your storage system, but it doesn't serve any purpose. So you can easily hoard too much information. And you must organize your information properly so that it makes sense. Otherwise, it's just a bulk of stuff, and when you look for information, you don't get it. That's why we have the naming conventions. And the naming conventions will also apply to things like photographs and recordings and videos that you photograph with your phone or camera or something like that. If you are stuck in a system somewhere where they need physical signature on your documents, this can be a bit of a challenge. We can overcome that with hybrid systems, which we will talk about. Or nowadays you get tablets with pens where you can actually sign on the document. Or we can even stick PDF signatures on there, although there are certain risks associated with that too. Nothing comes without risk. Unfortunately, if you have a lot of storage, most of these services are free. Dropbox, Google Online, I think OneDrive, if you buy Microsoft Office software, they all give you a certain amount of storage for free, but it's not that much, 200 megabytes or something like that. And if you have a lot of documentation, you will have to buy additional storage space. For me, it's absolutely worth it. I have a lot of information stretching over many years, and I am storing them in 3 different places. Copy in Dropbox, copy in Google Drive, and a copy somewhere in OneDrive. And I pay for my storage. I think Dropbox will cost me, I've got a family plan where 6 people can join at the same time, but that costs about 3,000 Rand a year. So large online storage will cost you money, but I promise you, when you get a computer stolen, or you lose a phone, or something breaks, your computer's hard drive fails, you will be glad that you spent that money. I have had many, many returns. My phones and things are all backed up. I once lost my phone somewhere. I took my wife on a camel ride while I was working in Dubai, and my phone got lost. And that was quite a problem, because your contacts and everything gets lost, emails, the whole lot. I went to the shop, bought another phone, restored my backup on my phone, and 25 minutes, my phone looked and worked exactly the same way that it did before I lost the other one. I incidentally got that other one back 3 months later. Somebody picked it up in the desert and returned it to me. But having backups and being able to recover them at a snap, that is absolutely not worthless. What do they say? It's you can't calculate the value to that. But you need a good backup discipline. So how do we overcome these advantages and disadvantages? Well, what we often do is we use a hybrid approach. A lot of the time, the documents that we generate electronically, that we make available to people, that they can refer to, we do that electronically, and we put it in a central storage place, and we share the drives, we share the directories with permissions, so that people can often just read them and not edit the documents, and they can then have access to the reference documents. Documents that people need to write on, we give them the forms and the templates, and then we implement a schedule, we implement scanning. Nowadays there are lots of easy camera-based or phone-based scanning software, Scanner, Microsoft Office Lens, Adobe Scanner, many of them, where when you've done the inspections, or when you've completed the checklists and the forms, you can actually scan the document, and it becomes an electronic copy of that document, while you still have a hard copy somewhere. So if your hard copy gets destroyed, you still have an electronic document with signatures and whatever that you can show on them. They are normally time and date stamped, and for people that are not so electronically literate, they can still use a pen and paper to complete these things. But like I said, you need to structure your data storage so that if the inspections come in, you name them. Inspection, give it a location or a descriptor with a date and a time, so that I can keep those things and I know exactly which of my inspections and checklists have been completed. Sometimes it becomes necessary that I print these documents. We then print them. Normally a footnote at the bottom that says the document is only valid for 24 hours. No changes are allowed on the document. But people can then take this document, and I do that sometimes when I want to go and work somewhere where it's dirty and I don't want to take my computer or my laptop or something. I will print a reference document, take it with me, and afterwards I will just throw it away, put it in the recycling bin. So I like hybrid systems. Like I said before, I use Dropbox. You can set up your file structure exactly the way that you want in Dropbox. One thing that I don't like about Dropbox is when people make the mistake sometimes of cutting and pasting documents, and then that document is deleted. And if the document is deleted on your computer, it also deletes it in the cloud and the sky. So it does come with disadvantages. Google Drive, you can set who people can edit. Google Drive is cheap. It works with all your Google Mail, Google Calendar, and a whole lot of things, and the Google apps. So I use Google Drive as well from time to time. Specifically for Google Classroom, I do use Google Drive because it's easy to have my documents there. And then for the bigger picture, I use Microsoft OneDrive, and then I use something called SharePoint. But SharePoint is costing a bit of money, so it's not something that I would recommend for small businesses. Only once you start making a bit of money and you start operating at the next level, then SharePoint starts making sense.